I feel like dealerships in general view service advisors wrong. They're viewed as a customer service. Uh, I guess a good way to put it is a customer service employee, but also they're expected to generate a lot of revenue. In reality, I think they should be seen as an elite salesperson. When you look at it, a top tier salesperson is going to average seeing three, maybe at the most five people a day, but a top tier advisor is going to see 20 or more people every single day. And then when you look at that, if you look at the revenue they generate, yes, the salespeople in the variable side generate a lot of revenue. So do the people in the service department. But when you start looking at net profit, other than a little spike we had when everything was selling for way over sticker, and we don't even want to talk about that crazy time in our lives. There's just so much more net profit in the service department on sales of service. I think that we need to treat these as salespeople, elite salespeople, and I think we need to hire very intentionally with them. When I talk about an average performer, one of the things that comes to mind is that they're not consistent. They may have an amazing day or an amazing month even, but what's going to happen the next month? They're going to go back to different bad habits. And everyone says, well, it's training. It's training. Training is important also. And but when you are looking for someone who separates themselves from everyone else, it's about habits. I don't want to sit there and talk about, okay, what's their effective labor rate? What are their dollars per RO? I want to look at their body of work, because you can have someone with a very high dollars per RO, but are they working with the same clients over and over again? And when you look at this in that way, which ones are dealing with the same customers over and over, you realize that now you have someone with a loyal client base. They don't do this because they're nice, and they don't do it because they sell a lot. They do it because they're top tier communicators. When they tell a client they're going to call them back with an inspection report or an update, even if they have no information, they're going to call them back. They're also great time managers. So when you look at, you can have someone who's an incredibly talented salesperson on the service drive who can't manage his time. And then you always see them, they will consistently have a little bit lower dollars per RO. They will have a few less ROs over the course of the week because they're always trying to catch up. And then I mentioned the time management that comes right into your follow-up. So with the follow-up, you have to know that you're going to be busy from this time to that time. And one of the most successful advisors I've ever seen was at a Buick GMC Cadillac dealership. Her name is Annie. She follows up on her promises. So when she tells a client, I'm going to call you back, she always tells them, I'm going to call you back between 10 and 11, and I'm going to call you back between 2 and 3. That way she has an hour window in each of those times, and she will call those clients. If she has 40 open ROs at one time, she will call all 40 of those people in one of those two times. I could talk for another 30 minutes about what separates $1 million from a poor performer. And I would say they can build trust quickly and maintain that trust. That's the most important thing. Obviously, those are all three important. And if we put training and culture together, it really comes down to hiring versus culture and training. And I'm hesitating a little bit. When you asked me that question, I had to sit down and ask myself, okay, those are both very important. They're both more or less equally important. But if one's 49% important, one's 51% important, I'm going to say that the hiring is 51% important. And I know that's counter to what everybody says. Everybody says you have to have a great training. But in reality, you have to hire very intentionally. If you have someone come in who is a mid-level performer, an elite service advisor is not born, just like there's no such thing as a natural born salesman, but some people have better habits for that. We see it right here in our own company about how people do things and who performs and who doesn't. But if you get someone who has the ability to be an average performer, an average communicator, you can make them a better than average. In fact, you can probably make them a really good service advisor by training processes, a great onboarding process. But all of these are part of the hiring. But if you didn't hire an elite candidate, you won't get an elite performer. And that's not my opinion. I base that on many years of observation, and I'm lucky enough to actually see, you know, dozens of service advisors in action every week. And I have a conversation every week with either a service manager, a fixed operations director, a general manager, or a dealer. And I will ask some of these questions, and you can really tell who is hiring with intent on their service drive. So when we talk about the culture and the coaching, you have to have culture and the environment, but after that first critical step of hiring the right person, you absolutely have to have strong operational support for that person. There's got to be accountability. There has to be efficient processes, because if you don't have efficient processes, they're going to become frustrated and they're going to stay an average advisor. And then there's also you've got to have leadership involvement. I've said management several times, but they can't be managers. They have to be leaders. They have to bring these people up. If they have an elite performer, sure, they don't have to spend as much time with them. But if you don't have the right coaching, the right support, and the accountability, even talented people will burn out. But what it really comes down to, in my opinion, is processes. And the process normally is the service manager walks out and singles out the people who have poor processes, and then point at that person and tell them they've got to get better. Y What have they really done there? And again, I'm trying to point towards not the top tier service managers also, because if you have 2 or 3 top tier elite service advisors in a dealership, you can count on it being a top tier elite level service manager in there too, but they don't need my help. They already know what they're doing. With them, that we can sit down and talk, but someone who's trying to figure out how to avoid those mistakes. Again, it goes right back to the onboarding process, but let's talk more about in the process of writing service now. I think that they focus more on dollars rather than the customer experience is what I would have to say about how to increase it. And if you just go out there and try to have people sell, they're going to increase the dollars per RO. If you have a decent training program, if you have reasonably talented people, and you walk out as a service manager and tell everybody we've got to get another 3/10 of an hour, they're going to get 3/10 of an hour. Some are going to get 5/10 of an hour. But then you get into several other things. You get into where it becomes selling rather than educating. You have a lot of overselling then. You have a lot of different things because these advisors who are not the elite talents are not being trained and coached the right way. They're just being told what they have to do. And something I say every time that we launch a store, and I'm talking to the management team before I go in and talk to the service advisors, I try to set the expectation that on a new VIN client or a lost client who's not been back there in more than 2 years, dollars per RO should really mean nothing with these clients. In fact, as a manager, you should be coaching your people not to have a high dollar per RO, because you want them to have a good experience. You don't want them to feel like they were oversold. So if you can treat that client right the first couple of times, your dollars per RO are going to come down the road, because they felt they weren't customers, they were clients. They weren't sold, they were educated. And if there's something that doesn't need to be done right now, don't try to sell it to them. Tell them, let's take care of this next time. I love the car business, but one of our greatest habits is to walk out on the service drive and tell them they've got to have more dollars per RO. KPIs are critical, but I think that a better indicator if they're going to be a top performer is their behavior. You don't want to see them overselling. You don't want to see them moving in too fast to hit those KPIs. Because if I come in and sit down with you and say, I need you to hit these 3 things, these are your these are your KPIs. And if you don't hit these KPIs, we're going to have to make some changes. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to go out and hit those KPIs, but you're going to miss a lot of other things. So you want to look at someone who is spending the time with their client, who is educating their client, who is building rapport with their client, not just for this visit, but for the next 3 visits. And then when you start looking at those KPIs, you will see a correlation between advisor behavior and advisor KPIs. Someone who has great behavioral uh, sit- um, traits, I guess is the best way to put it. You're going to see they're going to have growth in their effective labor rate. You're going to see that their inspection completion percentage is higher than your average or even your good advisors. You're going to see a lot more maintenance penetration. When someone comes in for warranty, you're going to see a lot more of those people getting oil changes, a lot more of those people getting this kind of work done. And you're also going to see another thing that we don't normally think about, but you're going to see declined service follow up. Everybody thinks, well, you know what, our BDC will do that. But if you have a BDC calling up, is that BDC more effective than your service advisor? The show rates are going to go up because they're seeing the same clients over and over. And also, their CSI is going to be much more consistent. Not necessarily that they're trying to build their CSI. They're not calling and saying, hey, you've got to help me out, but they have real CSI. It's not a function of someone calling them up, and their customer retention. When you start talking about customer retention, this is where your dollars per hour go up. This is where your show rate goes up. All of these things are imperative, and when you have someone who's retained the same book of clients over a year, 2 years, 3 years, they're going to get a lot more technician acceptance rate. You know, that when the technician says it needs something, the client believes them because they aren't being sold; they're being educated. They usually aren't hitting the KPIs because they were forced through. They're hitting them because they've developed behavioral patterns that allowed them to get there. Hiring intentionally is the most important thing because you have to hire somebody with the intent of having them as a long term, very high performing advisor. So you have to very, very carefully hire your people and be prepared to walk away from a good candidate if they don't fit your culture. If you have someone you're hiring as a service advisor, you can't hope they're going to be a long-term advisor, and you can't wish that they're going to be an elite producer. You have to believe it, have evidence that backs that up, and it should never be the service manager's sole decision. That they should also meet the fixed operations director. Once those two managers believe that they're a good fit, then I believe they should meet a couple of the other service advisors, especially their high performers, because they're going to have to work with these people. And this is a cultural decision, not just a numbers decision. And then finally, I believe that they should meet the general manager. The advisor has to know what your culture is like. They have to know what's expected of them. They have to have daily coaching. They have to have accountability, and it has to be done in a positive way. And then there has to be a consistent inspection process because if you have someone and you check their open ROs, for instance, once a month, what are you really doing? You're telling them that once a month they're going to have to get their stuff together. But if you go out 2 or 3 times a day, look at the route sheet. Looks like this has been open for 3 days, and I don't really see any updates. What's the status on this, and when was the last time you talked to the customer? I mentioned that the service advisors are the spiritual leaders of the dealership. Well, when they're dealing with a technician, they've got to have great communication. They've got to understand what that technician needs from them and for them to sell. But the technician needs to understand what the advisor's trying to do. The technician needs to be comfortable picking up the phone and calling that advisor. Or if it is a team system, the team's leader's got to know that he can read that advisor's notes and go communicate with his technician. Finally, I think there has to be leadership visibility in the lane. It can't be that the service manager is sitting in the office or looking through the glass. The service manager needs to be walking out there talking to them, and you've got to do some role playing. You just can't go tell them this is wrong, this is right. You have to go in and tell them, and then show them how it's done. If you want to have elite long-term service advisors, you have to be part of their life. And you don't have to love them, but you have to care about them. And they have to know that you care about them, and not because you walk out and tell them, I care about you, man. You're doing a great job. They've got to know because you're out there seeing them every day. You're talking to them. You're telling them what they did right, what they did wrong. And more importantly, when they did something wrong, how can you translate those wins they had against this loss, and how can we improve it?